Saving for the future can seem very complicated. Where do you start? Where can you get information that uses plain English? And what do all those abbreviations mean? Hello, I'm Ross Mould, AJ Bell's Investment Director, and I'd like to talk to you about the options you have when it comes to saving for your retirement and which is best. An individual savings account, or ISA, or a self-invested personal pension, a SIPP. Now both are what are known as wrappers, places you can put your investments to shelter them from tax and help your savings grow. Each has its own advantages, and which one you prefer will come down to your own personal circumstances. Now first up, an ISA operates under a TEE regime. This means you put taxed income into the wrapper, but any gains you make and any ultimate withdrawals are generally tax-free, hence TEE, taxed exempt exempt. Those tax breaks are a big plus in favour of ISAs, so here's a point to them. Now with a SIPP you get tax relief on the way in. For example, if you are a 20% taxpayer, you contribute £8,000 to your SIPP and the government tops you up with another £2,000, making 10 grand in total. During the SIPP's lifetime, any gains or dividends are also generally free of tax, and the first 25% of any ultimate withdrawal is tax-free too. The remainder is then taxed at your marginal rate of 20, 40 or 45%. This means SIPPs operate under an EET regime, exempt, exempt, taxed. The tax reliefs are a huge boost. The government wants you to save and is offering you cash with which to do so, so that has to be a point in favour of using a SIPP for your retirement. SIPPs have other tax advantages too, especially if you plan carefully. You can use your personal allowance, an annual allowance, so the first chunk of any benefits withdrawn in a given year can also be tax-free. In 2015, it is the first £10,600, and in 2016-17, it's the first £10,800. Next, you can carefully phase any withdrawals from your SIPP, so you stay in the 20% tax band, maximising the value of any tax reliefs on the way in, especially if you are now a 40 or 45% ratepayer because of your other income. Were any withdrawal to take you into the upper tax brackets, then your pension income could also be subject to 40 to 45% tax. Plus, you can initially withdraw 25% of your SIPP as a tax-free pension commencement lump sum, or PCLS. The table behind me summarises the tax reliefs, marginal tax rates that apply on withdrawals and the potential tax benefits of using an ISA and a SIPP. Now let's try and turn this into a practical example with two people, Tom and Alice. Tom, he's a 20% taxpayer. He invests 8 grand a year for 20 years in an ISA, and this portfolio gives him a 4% annual return. He ends up with this figure here. Alice, she's also a 20% taxpayer. She also invests 8 grand a year for 20 years, but does it in a SIPP, also getting that 4% annual return. She ends up with this sum. Now the big difference comes from the upfront tax reliefs on her SIPP contributions, which give her more money to invest each year. Tom then retires and withdraws 4% a year from his ISA. He gets this sum each time with no further tax hit. Alice then retires and also withdraws 4% a year from her SIPP. On a like-for-like basis, she gets this figure. But she can then use the personal allowance, so she only pays 20% tax on the other £1,788. So she can take out this amount each year, 21% more than Tom. Better still, if Alice uses the PCLS, she can take all of the 12 grand plus tax-free, assuming she has no other income. She can take £3,097 as her 25% tax-free lump sum, and the remaining £9,291, well, they come within the personal allowance, so there's no tax to pay at all in this particular circumstance. Now, there's nothing like cold hard cash to focus the mind, and that exercise does show the power of the tax reliefs enjoyed by SIPPs. I'm sorry to say the next issue to consider is what happens when we die. Now, it's not nice, but one point of saving is to look after our loved ones. With an ISA, your spouse or civil partner gains extra allowance that they can then pay into their ISA to effectively keep the tax benefits of your portfolio. But SIPPs have some advantages here too. On death, the SIPP can be passed on tax-free if the deceased is aged under 75. SIPP nomination forms readily available on our website mean you can make a nomination that tells us as your scheme administrator who you would like to receive the benefits. If the deceased is over 75, then the benefits are subject to income tax. But by carefully electing who you want the fund to be passed to, you can still plan in a tax efficient manner. Picking your children or grandchildren, for example, could save on tax, assuming your partner doesn't need the money. Now, moving swiftly on from those morbid thoughts, we can close out with a few other options for retirement savers to consider. With an ISA, you can access your cash whenever you wish, so they are very good for early retirements. With a SIPP, you must be 55 before you access your pot. You may have to wait to access your SIPP, but you can do so in several ways. By taking the whole fund in one go, withdrawing small lumps, and/or taking a regular income. These different mechanisms allow you to choose how much money you would like to take and when to best suit your needs and circumstances. This means a SIPP can be a very flexible savings tool, something that does also apply to ISAs. Both wrappers score a point here. And that's about it. SIPPs have come out on top for retirement saving because of the tax reliefs, which more than offset some of the extra costs associated with a SIPP related to an ISA. But there are three final points I'd like to make. 1. Both wrappers help shelter your savings from tax so they can grow quicker, and ISAs and SIPPs can be used together. 2. ISAs can have a role to play, especially if you want to retire early or even need the cash before you retire. And 3. SIPPs do seem more subject to rule changes, so you need to keep up to date, and we will certainly do our best to help you here. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.